All right, so today we're going to talk about one of the things that we get asked super often whenever we do a strength progression, and that's why do we not max out at the end of every single one that we do? It's actually pretty seldom that we max out on any one of our strength progressions. And there's some really good reasons behind that. I just don't think that we've ever really gone in depth about why that is. So what we're going to cover today is, for one, what we're trying to accomplish every time we do a strength progression, and also kind of the reasoning, and I guess if you want to say like the science behind what we're trying to accomplish, why we don't max out, and that should help kind of give a better idea of exactly what we're doing here. So the first thing is just what is a progression? So it's just a systematic increase in intensity over a specific period of time. That period of time for us, whenever it comes to class programming, is usually 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, at most of the time. And the reason for that is just, we're trying to blend a very diverse amount of things with a general class setting. Some people are going to do really well with a squat progression, while others are going to do very well with a deadlift. Some are going to do better with cleans and snatches and all that stuff. And we'll talk about what kind of like the limitations are later on and the reasons why some people do better in different movements. But overall, we try to mix up the progressions enough to where you get exposed to a wide variety of movements over the course of a year. Okay, so that's why we don't see anything like a 12-week progression or anything like that. To actually have success in a progression, one of the things that we're trying to accomplish in that is a state called supercompensation. So essentially what that is it's creating a fatigue state and adapting to the stimulus you subjected the body to. The only way to create supercompensation is progressively overload the system and allow the body to adapt in a deload period. What that means is basically we're going to spend 3 to 4 weeks really overloading your system, whether that's with the loading of the barbell, so increasing the weights incrementally over a period of time, whether it's like that 4 weeks or whatever the case is. It could be reducing rest periods, so we make the intensity go up from there. It could also be as simple as changing the volume. So instead of doing 8 sets or 5 sets at 4 reps, we're doing 5 sets at 5 reps and 5 reps at 6 reps, or 5 sets at 6 reps, so on and so forth. There's all different forms of progressions. I mean, there's undulating progressions, there's step progressions, there's linear progressions. There's a bunch of different options for how you do a progression. Ultimately, they're all trying to accomplish the same thing: overload the system, then give it a period of a deload, and a deload is just a short period of recovery. That deload is there to allow your body to adapt to all of the overload that we have exposed it to over that period of time. Doesn't matter what the movement is, so it could be a squat, deadlift, bench press, clean, doesn't matter. The biggest thing is just making sure that we are overloading the system and allowing it a time to adapt to that overload. At that point, we can either continue on with that progression or we can move on to a different one. But overall, that's what we're looking to accomplish. If we successfully do that, it doesn't really make any difference whether we max or not. You are going to see performance gains on that. So you're going to see strength gains during that progression. As long as you followed it the way that it was written, you have accurate numbers. You didn't just kind of like go in there and you're just saying, oh, well, at one point in time, I squatted 300 pounds. So for this 5x5, I'm just going to do 250 and just see what happens. I mean, you're probably going to get pretty limited results based off of stuff like that. That's why it's super important, and we remind you all the time to record your scores, record your weights, so we can refer back to it at a different period whenever we revisit this progression. There's a couple limitations to all of this, right? So obviously, if we were to follow this progression and it was a perfect world and we did all of this accurately, you're going to see something like, okay, if we did all this perfectly, you're going to see some sort of advance or strength gain or whatever the case is at the end of the progression. You might see, a 5-pound jump or a 15-pound jump. It kind of depends on a variety of different things. The first limitation there that we're going to talk about is just your genetic potential. What are you genetically capable of right at this time? It could have a ton of different things, whether that's your age. Your training age is a really big one as well. Training age referring to the period of time that you've been training. So if you've been training for a year, you're probably going to see pretty big gains every single strength progression if you follow it accurately. If you've been training for 12 years, we're going to start seeing stuff like 1 kilo jumps in your big lifts, or we're going to say, I mean, even that would be a huge gain, a big successful gain for somebody that's been training in this area for 12 years. So those are some things that we have to kind of take into consideration. Whenever we're talking about genetics, everybody has a physical limit or a physical potential that they'll eventually reach. Typically, that doesn't happen until you're an advanced or an elite level athlete. So most of our everyday gym goers aren't going to really see that physical or genetic limit. They're probably not even going to come anywhere close to it in the course of their time practicing or training CrossFit. Another one is your synthetic profile. Synthetic meaning drugs. Are you on drugs? Are you not on drugs? What's the situation there? Obviously, we're not here to condone using drugs, but if you're doing that, behind the scenes and coming into the gym, but then the next strength progression, you decide, I don't want to pay for drugs anymore. I don't want to take drugs anymore. You're going to see a different result, a drastically different result. So if you hit something while you're on drugs, that next time you're trying to do it without drugs, you're likely not going to see that number again. So there's really no point in us testing at that point. So another limiting factor is your hormones, testosterone capacity, adrenal capacity, growth hormone capacity. All of these things are going to take a huge effect, and they're, for the most part, some of these things are kind of out of your control. There are definitely things that you can do, especially as it depends on like your age. If you're a 50-year-old man, you might have lower testosterone than you did whenever you were 20, which obviously means that you're going to have a huge difference in the way that your body reacts to a strength progression. Physical limitations would be like joint capacity, joint insertion points, lever efficiency. How well does your body move in that particular movement? I mean, some people do very well in a squat, while others do much better in like a deadlift or a clean, while others just don't do very well on a snatch. It just really depends on what your body is capable of. Whenever we talk about joint insertion points, so where the muscle actually enters in, and, talking about lever efficiency, just those things are something that your body is built the way that it's built. There's nothing we can do to change that. Some movements just aren't going to work very well to people. So you have to keep that in mind whenever you are looking at it as, I want to make a 20-pound jump in the strength progression. You might not see that because your body might not be built to support that. One of the other limitations would be mental limitations. So stress, distractions, focus. When we talk about stress, I'm talking about your family life, work. Work is a huge factor. Most of the people that come into the gym, they are working every day. And even if you're not, you probably have a family that you're dealing with. That can add a different level and a different dynamic of stress. So we want to keep that in mind whenever we're going to progression. What was your stress like during that period of time? And that's even going to have an effect on your hormones as well during that period. Distractions, once again, if you're focused on work and you're not really focused on, performing your best during this time, then that's going to play a huge role in your ability to progress during this cycle. And then focus, whenever you're talking about focus, people don't really think that, that mind-body connection is super important. That neuromuscular efficiency is what we're referring to, but your ability to actually make your mind tell your body what it is that you want it to do. That is something that people take for granted all the time. That's why we're trying to tell people to be super focused during the time of your lifts. We want to treat every single lift as if it is a maximal effort, because we're going to recruit the muscles better whenever we're going through those processes. We're going to be able to actually focus on any imbalances, so we can start to make little tweaks and little adjustments as we're going through the process. So then maybe you can hit, a PR, or get close to it, or at the very minimum, get the most out of the strength progression. A lot of people aren't focused whenever they come to the gym, and that's fine. It just depends on what your goals are specifically. If you're planning on trying to reach, optimal strength gains, you have to be really focused on that. Okay. And then one of the biggest ones is nutrition. Are you eating enough to support lifting heavier than you ever have before? Are you eating enough, and are you eating quality foods that are going to be able to fuel your system to be able to lift the weights that you're looking to lift? If the answer is no, then the rest of this is essentially a moot point, and asking about us maxing out is kind of silly. There's really no point of us asking, or you asking about, hey, are we going to max out, if the moment that you leave the gym, you're going to get, a Big Mac or whatever the case is, and that's not going to be beneficial for you. That's not going to help you get to the position that you want to be in. So if you're serious about increasing your strength, you have to be serious about what you're doing to fuel your system. Okay. At the end of the day, everybody is going to make improvements in these strength progressions if you followed it as planned, and as long as the majority of these other factors are supportive of growth. If not, then you're probably not going to see this huge progression as far as overall strength. Your absolute strength. That's probably not going to be where you see your gains. But it's very beneficial to still be able to move a weight efficiently, to be able to say, okay, well, now my squat looks better. I feel more comfortable. My knees don't hurt. My hips don't hurt. That's a big win in a strength progression, even if you didn't see, an overall absolute strength increase. That's still a huge win for us. And that's something that we want to think about and take into consideration every single time that you're doing a strength progression. And then the biggest part about that too is that at some point, everyone will eventually reach a max in a lift that they will never repeat or never see again, because of the factors that we talked about above. It could be you may have had an injury at one point, so that's going to prevent you from ever seeing the number that you saw 5 years ago. Maybe you've been training for 20 years, so the numbers that you hit 5 years ago, you're probably not going to repeat, but that might not mean that you're any less of an athlete. You still could be a better athlete. You might not just lift as much as you did before. And then another factor, and the one that we're going to finish on here, is just that if we were to max out every single time that we do a strength progression, one of the things that's likely to happen is people are going to see, I didn't make the increase that I wanted to make. I wanted to do 20 pounds more in my back squat, but now I only did 2 pounds more, or I didn't even hit my last PR. Whenever we have something like that happen, that's very discouraging. And that's not what we want to, have going on into our programming. We don't want people to feel discouraged, because that's going to that's going to prevent them from wanting to come back and do another strength progression where they, again, might not see the strength gains that they're wanting to have, but when we think about that, there's so many other factors that go into it. It's not as simple as I did a strength progression, now I'm stronger. I really wish it was, because it would make our jobs really fucking easy if we could just say, hey, everybody follow this strength progression. Next thing you know, you're going to hit 20 pounds heavier, or 30 pounds heavier, 50 pounds heavier, whatever the case is. I mean, we'd all be tremendous athletes if it was that simple, but there is so much that goes into it. So always keep that in mind. And I know it's a longer video. It's meant to be, because we don't really get to explain these things in class. But just kind of keep it in mind. We have a ton of different things that go into the programming. I promise you, if you follow it the way that it's designed, as well as taking the extra steps outside of the gym to support growth in these programs and in these cycles, I promise you, you're going to see improvement over the long run.